Good morning. My name is David Margolin, and this is another edition of tips and tricks, just some ideas in how to make medium range forecasts, at least based on my experience. Um, so for today, it's October 22nd, and we're forecasting for November 6th through November 10th. Before we get into the forecast, I always like to look at attribution, look at some of the past forecasts and see how the forecast has been verifying. So we'll do that. And the other thing I want to show you is just some other um, research that we're working on to hopefully help with the forecast process. All right, so first of all, let's go back to the most recent verification, and I believe that is going to be from forecast initialized on October 1st and verifying just a couple days ago. You can see up here. Um, you have some sorting abilities here. The long story short is this was another tough week for most forecasts. A couple exceptions up here, but for most of the human and non-human forecast here, you can see the skill. Anything negative is not good, at least relative to the 30-year normal, and you can kind of get an indication of why. Verification came in at 50 HDDs and normal was almost 50 HDD. So relative to normal, most folks did not do well. A couple uh, data points really stand out. The ECMWF, it's kind of continues in the haphazard fashion here. The ECMWF had a HDD of 31, and again, we verified at 50, so it was way off the mark here. It was so far off. It's whenever you see something like that, you want to kind of spot check, sanity check, and so thanks to again our friends at Maxar, I was able to do just that, and so I pulled up. This is Maxar's forecast from October 1st, so it's the same verification date, October 16th and 20th. You can see the EC weeklies here was quite warm. Again, a lot of the forecasts were quite mild, thus the low HDDs. And and actually here's what verified again, thanks to our friends at Maxar. This pretty cool product here, the Dynacast. You can see we had a lot of below normal temperatures actually come in across the eastern half of the country. So I'm not going to go into too much of an attribution here, in part, unfortunately, because I haven't had time, but also just to keep this short. But I just will note that we talked quite a bit about this last week, and one of the things we at least discussed was the idea of some of that cold pool in southwestern Canada maybe not being well resolved by the models, and perhaps that continued to have an influence here once we saw that pattern shift that we saw start to come in last week. It seems like some of that still kind of was with us through the current week verification. So, but bottom line is, at least one of the takeaways here, models, most of the human inputs, again, struggle this week. So there's nothing here that suggests that, or any clear indication that the ECMWF or CFS is doing significantly better. In fact, just one more point about the ECMWF. We've talked to, I think, some in these discussions about the poor performance, including during pattern transitions, and I think that's really important because pattern transitions are arguably the most important event to really try to forecast well. And I don't have the graphic up today, but we've looked back since the summer, and in particular during some of the big swings. For example, there was the one coolish period in August, and then of course the transition to a record warm September for a lot of the national CDDs in particular. Did not handle those situations well, and here we are again in this kind of cool pocket, and the EC was really bucking the trend there. And if you had really put all your eggs in the EC basket here, it would have really been painful. All right, so that takes us. Let's shift over now to today's forecast, October 22nd. Again, my forecast on input number one down here at the bottom. So just a couple quick things about my formula here today. So the biggest change was just to continue to weight the 30-year normals higher at the expense of some of the shorter-term normals, such as the 10-year. This is something we've talked about for the last few weeks. It's not a sexy kind of formula change, but it's something that I expect to continue to do as we shift from winter to summer, or summer to winter, based on my view that climate change is having a stronger warming influence in the summer than winter. So that was the biggest change I made. A couple additional takeaways. I already addressed the EC and the poor performance here. The CFS, interesting, one of the studies that one of the folks who's involved in the forecast contest is doing shows that the CFS actually over the last several months has had a negative correlation with skill. So that's probably enough said about that. Tropical forcing. So the long story short here was I didn't adjust my numbers solely as a function of tropical forcing. However, I did take note of Professor Roundy's tool and also Caitlin's tools, which I've showed in the past. And Professor Roundy's tool shows a transition from kind of cold to warm. Caitlin's tools, in my interpretation, kind of shows more of a muddled picture. So that again, that didn't maybe change my numbers, but I do note that my numbers are less cold, I guess, lower HDDs and some of the market numbers and things like that. And that I guess subjectively speaking, kind of gives me a little warm and fuzzy feeling. Not that there's not a strong reason to go, in that upper end. At least based on the data points that I see. I did want to just talk about one other MGO or tropical forcing type product that a few of us were working on. This is something that I've been collaborating with Professor Decker at Rutgers and Zach Magis, student at Rutgers, with. It's a work in progress, but it did factor into my forecast contest, so I want to share it. So this is another way of looking at potentially the impacts of MJO in the 16-20 day period. So we're looking at the RMM phase diagram, or pseudo of that. So you get your phases 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then this is color. This is looking at HDs, HD anomalies. It's looking at lag 16 to 20. So it's looking at our forecast window, and it's showing you the anomalies as a function of where you're initialized. And so we know, I'm just going to go over here, we know we're initialized kind of somewhere out there around phase 2-ish, right? So somewhere out here. And sort of the long story short I get from this, it's another data point that kind of tells me that there's not really, in my opinion, a strong signal as a function of MJO alone. There's a little bit of a warm dot here or indicator here, but there's also a lot of blank space, and the blank points suggest that, or indicate that it's between -5 and +5, so quote unquote kind of weak signal. So that's why you see a lot of this kind of white space here. And then occasionally you see these bigger dots, and the bigger dots are indicators of stronger anomalies, but there's not a lot of cohesion to this. Maybe in the next update, I'll show you what this looks like for like December or January. And in December or January, I think you see much stronger signals. All right, so I think I'm going to leave it there. So that concludes our discussion for today. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we will try to do it again next week.